So we're going to cover how to essentially install CSI Linux onto an internal hard drive of a computer. So what I've done previously is I downloaded the new CSI Linux 2023, put it onto an external hard drive. In this case, it's a solid state drive, and it's connected to a USB port on a computer. And then I also have Clonezilla installed on a USB thumb drive. So the back end, how I installed the CSI Linux onto the external hard drive was used HDD raw copy, pointed the DD file to the external drive, tested it with booting it up, and it worked just fine. So now I'm going to copy that disk onto an internal hard drive of a computer. So I'm going to boot it up real quick. Once it is booting up, I'm going to hit F12 to get into the boot menu. So now we see the verbatim. The verbatim drive is what has Clonezilla installed on it. And then this JM Micron, or JMicron Tech, that's essentially a SATA converter to USB. This is the drive we're going to install from onto an internal drive. So here, I'm going to boot up off Clonezilla. Relatively straightforward. So again, going to enter. Then it's going to set up Clonezilla, especially trying to look for keyboard information. Once that sets up, we'll be able to move on forward. So it's rebooting the OS. I'm going to go into Clonezilla VGA mode. This Clonezilla is on a USB 2 drive, so this part's a little bit slower, but it's going to speed up a little bit once it starts doing the imaging process, because it's going from a solid state to another solid state. This usually takes about 15 minutes. If you're going to put it to a platter drive, or if you have an external drive, which is a platter drive or an HDD, may take 30 minutes or so, depending on, again, a few different variables. So it looks like Clonezilla's up. Into English for the keyboard. Hit OK again. Going to start Clonezilla. I'm going to do device to device because I'm pulling it from an external triage drive. And again, install the triage drive directly onto the internal hard drive. So device to device. It's now looking for all the devices that are on this computer. So there should be a total of 3, or actually 4, because I do have another drive in the system as well. So we're going to go to expert mode. The reason I'm picking expert mode is because the external SSD drive is, I believe, either 250 or 500 gig, and the internal is only 128. So we're going to do disk to disk or disk to local disk. And we'll get back to the size difference here in just a minute once we get to the setting area. So now here we're going to take the 250. That's going to be the source. And destination, I'm going to put onto the 128. So this is what I was mentioning with the size difference. This is why we went into expert mode and not beginner mode, because beginner mode would have thrown up an error saying destination disk is too small. But because the image is only about 50 gig anyway, it doesn't matter when pushing it onto the smaller drive, because the 128 is definitely bigger than 50 gig. So I'm going to make sure that that's marked. Hit OK. So again, we're skipping the checking destination size. We're just going to blast it on. Hit OK, OK. I want to choose, so I'll hit OK again. Now again, it's verifying when it entered. It's going to warn me if I want to destroy all the data on that disk. So I want it yes to continue. I want it destroyed. So verifying it's the 128 gig, that's what I want to overwrite. So it's overwriting the SDB with partitions SDB 1, 2, and 3. 3 is going to be the main CSI partition. We have SDB2, which essentially is the EFI partition, then you have the boot. So again, hit Y for yes. It asks again just to make sure. So again, you do not want to go to the wrong disk because you will overwrite the content, destroying all the data. So I hit yes again. And now it starts its process. And once it starts the actual copy, I'll probably speed up the video because this is where it kind of gets a little boring. But this should take about 10 minutes at this point. There is a place within here when it's trying to overwrite grub. It will error out, but that's fine. So essentially it's the same name. So right now it's doing the first partition. That's done. Now it's the second partition. Once that's done, it'll go to SDB3. So it says it's about 2 minutes remaining. As you can see, the rate is actually pretty decent. We have 14 gig per minute. There's not a lot of data on that disk or within that image itself. It is getting bigger, of course, but you still have about half that partition as empty space. So that's why this is going to be a little bit faster than doing a full-blown, let's say, 50 gig partition full of data. But once this is done, what we're going to do is reboot the system, or shut it down first, unplug both the Clonezilla disk and then that external SSD as well. Then we'll power the system back on and just make sure it catches or it boots up. And again, if it does boot up, then we're good to go. So almost done. Actually not speeding this up at all, just waiting for it to be done, because this does go pretty quick. But again, just as a reminder, if you are using an external HDD or a platter disk, this will be considerably slower. So the whole process usually is about 30 minutes, maybe 45. But yes, if you're doing a source SSD to SSD, the bottleneck realistically is going to be the your USB connection or the cable. And right now I have a pretty decent cable hooked up to USB 3. If you had a USB-C connection, that would be a little bit faster as well. But all in all, this is actually going pretty quick. As you can see, the steps for installing it onto an internal system isn't hard if you've done it before, but it is a little bit scary if you've, again, never used Clonezilla especially. So here, this is usually right in the section where the error is going to pop up for the grub. But again, that's okay because grub's already installed on the system. So it does not need to reinstall it in. So here we go. So just ignore that error. Once it pops up. Yeah, here it says grub install. Error cannot find EFI directory. That's fine. Failed to install grub. That's fine. It's already installed within the image itself. And we'll be able to see that here in just a second. Again, it's verifying. This takes about as long as the actual copy does. But again, once everything is done, it's going to let us know. Then we'll go to the next step, which essentially is shut down the system. It does take about 8 seconds or so to shut down the system. Again, not too terribly bad. It's a countdown or a timer. So we'll just wait for this to finish. And here we go. Now it's asking to press enter. Just hit Enter. Here you're going to go to power off. Here's the timer. Again, once it's off, I'm disconnecting both disks, the Clonezilla USB and the external SSD. Pressing power again on the box. And let's see if it boots up. This is a good sign. So this means it does see the UEFI content on the disk. If you do hit escape, you can see what it's doing in the background. And I did miss it because it just booted up. And since we're in a login screen, that means the data partition is good to go. Log in to verify. This looks good. So it booted up just fine, copied everything, and now my internal disk on this system is running CSI Linux. That's the way to install it. I am connected to my testbed network. Just want to double check, verify. It's got network, it's got internet, and see if Tor is working. So the next step you generally do after this is going to be the power up. So this does show that Tor is working as well. It's being banned. That's fine. But we are getting a response from the Tor website or the Tor network. So here you can either go into command line and type in power up or go through this icon. Once it asks for the password, put CSI in. Hit enter, or OK, and then just wait. Once it's done, it's going to reboot. You log back in, and you should be up to date. So again, just as a summary of this whole process, we went through, we put the triage disk onto an external hard drive, verified to make sure it booted up. Once it did, everything's good to go. Then we downloaded Clonezilla, installed that ISO onto a USB thumb drive. You're going to need at least I believe it's, to be on safe side, 4 gig. Should be able to work on 2 gig, but I use 4. And then plugged both of those into the box or into the system. Shut the system down. And then during boot up process, I pressed F12 to see the boot menu. And that shows the different systems or different drives that are bootable. The biggest thing you need to know for this to work is that you do need UEFI for the new CSI Linux 2023 triage disk, and then just turn off Secure Boot. If Secure Boot's turned on, it will not boot up off that drive. We did that on purpose, but if you turn it off, you should still be able to dual boot off Windows system. So for example, if that second drive had Windows installed on it, then you could actually update Grub to see both of those, and then you'd have the option for which system you want to boot up in, either CSI or Windows. But outside that, ran Clonezilla, imaged the external drive to the internal drive, rebooted, and it's working.